right after the 6 Day War. And that was when the propaganda really ramped up about this whole color thing. And so you had the militants who had adopted other ideologies, but their ideology linked up with this whole Israel's white and oppressing the brown Arabs. And so Dr. King, when he spoke, he didn't, before he said his thing about Israel, right before that, he talked about this whole thing about being color consumed. And he said there are those who are color consumed who see this kind of moral mystique in being colored. And he's like, that's not right. We don't follow that course.
Hi, all. I'm Maya Beretta with Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. I have a special guest here with us today, Joshua Washington from the Institute of Black Solidarity with Israel. Hi, Joshua. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Maya, for having me.
Tell me, Joshua, how did you get into this gig of Black Israel Solidarity action?
Well, it kind of started with my father being very it's so first of all, my sisters and I, we were, we grew up, we were Christian, we grew up in a Christian household, and our parents raised us with this, appreciation for the roots of our faith, as Christians, for the Jewish roots of our faith. And so it was very important to especially my father, that we understood certain customs, like Shabbat, like the feasts, and even the Hebrew calendar. And so it's something that we've followed, and even down to the parsha, like the weekly portions. Like we've been following those things since we were kids, and then the advocacy part of it came a little bit later on. But again, my father he had always been kind of immersed in what was going on in Israel, and also what was just going on the continent of Africa. And so he was always interested and fascinated. And right around the time I was in college is when he started doing more active political work, both on his own, and then he was asked to join Christians United for Israel on staff. So we did that for a few years, and through that, I got to meet a lot of people. I got to learn a lot of things. I got to do some of my own researching and branching out, and even as a musician, being able to connect with other musicians in different parts of the world, and especially Israel. And he founded the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel just before he joined CFOIC on staff. And then when he stepped down from CFOIC, he pretty much took the helm of Ipsy again, and has been thrusting us forward for the past few years now. And that's just so yeah, this whole Black and Jewish, and even like Africa Israel relations type of work has been very close to us, I mean, for years now. It's been a long time.
So you speak a lot about the history of the Black American and Jewish relationship. Give me a 1-minute synopsis of this history.
Yeah, so I'll try my best. Okay, so
I'm not timing you, but a fast one.
Sure. I guess you can start as far back as you can, but I'll just start with the early 1900s. You had Booker T. Washington, who was an educator. He was an incredibly intelligent man and teacher, and former slave. And you have Julius Rosenwald, who was by today's standards, I would say, billionaire philanthropist, businessman. And Julius Rosenwald, Jewish man, right? He found one of Booker T. Washington's books, was reading it, was inspired, reached out to him and said, "Hey, I want to help you. I want to help you any way I can. I want to help you build a school for young Black kids, because at that time, Black kids were not allowed to learn in schools with white people." And so, and Booker T. Washington said, "That sounds great, but let's build more than just one school." And they wound up building over 5,000 schools across the segregated South, and all the way even up north. I'm actually not far from one of them here. We're here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that whole era spawned a couple of generations of highly educated, very successful Black American leaders. There's so many people that can trace their greatness back to the Rosenwald schools. And that's kind of, for me, in terms of in this country, the foundation for Black and Jewish relations. One of them, I should say. And um, from then, that's one of many examples of the Black and Jewish synergy. So now then you have fast forward. Um, we like to talk about Dr. King and Rabbi
Yes,
Joshua
I would.
Heschel.
Right, I was
Um,
hoping you'd say that.
yeah, no, absolutely. That's the one that we all know the most. I love the Booker T. Washington Julius Rosenwald story, because Julius Rosenwald, one thing that I found really great was that his rabbi was very big on was he was like a very, very big on civil rights, and it was because of his rabbi that inspired him to reach out to Booker T. Washington in the first place. And to me, that's also the role of the religious leaders in this time as well, is that there's so much influence that they have. And then, of course, you fast forward to Dr. King's relationship with the Jewish community, and how much space he was given, and how much um, time and effort and help was given to Dr. King by rabbis and by other very wealthy members of the Jewish community who helped him in his movement for civil rights. That was huge. And Dr. King, I mean, he talked about it all the time. Matter of fact, some of the best quotes that we have from him were during conferences. Right before he was assassinated, he was at a rabbinical assembly, 10 days before his assassination, and that's where he talked about all kinds of things. But that's where we get his famous quote about Israel being an oasis of brotherhood and democracy, and a shining example of what can be done in the Middle East. He talks about, he wrestles with the difficulty. There was some tension between Black Americans and Jewish Americans in different parts, and he was breaking that down to what that was actually coming out to, and how most of the Black community was not anti-Semitic, but there were instances in the South where, and especially in places like Atlanta, where you did have landlords who happened to be Jewish who were charging more, to Black
Right.
people for their rent. And he was explaining that not only is that not some sort of Jewish conspiracy, but those specific people were operating contrary to their Jewish values. So he was talking about how these are just people, right? And he said, we've called out people who are members of the Black community who are doing these things. He said, so we don't make a distinction based on color or anything else. When we see these injustices, we just call it out. And so he was very, very smart about that. And just the fact that he was able to lay those things out in that space with Rabbi Gendler and at the Rabbinical Assembly was powerful. So there's always been this struggle. There's always been this struggling together. Jews have given their life, have given their bodies for the upliftment of Black Americans throughout history. I know this is beyond a minute, but one last thing I want to say too
Yeah.
is that right after Dr. King was assassinated, a few years after he was assassinated, when the United Nations passed the resolution 3379, that Zionism is racism, the response from the Black community was so big, and even though Dr. King had passed, a lot of his inner circle, one of his closest confidants, Bayard Rustin, founded an organization called Black Americans Supporting Israel Committee, BASIC.
Mhm.
And he started this to both stand with Israel, but also call out the injustices that were happening by the UN, and also to call out other Black leaders for not calling out Yasser Arafat. And he said that if we don't condemn him for the PLO and for their terrorism, what we're going to see is the terrorism that's happening in Israel is going to be exported all over the world. So this was back in the early 70s when he said this. And of course, now, I mean, when you think about just 9/11 alone, he was saying that this stuff is not going to stay in Israel. And so that was the moral courage and clarity that Black leaders had in standing with Israel and standing with the Jewish people. It wasn't just getting talking points, but it was actually setting things right and actually calling out things that needed to be called out. So that was a synergy that I think that spawned that. Absolutely.
So, right, many Jewish people are very much remember Rabbi Eshel, marching with Dr. King, and many Jews, whether it's influenced by our religion that we want justice, or always being the ones persecuted, wanting to stand up for those who are not treated equally under the law or persecuted in some instances. But then nowadays, there's this perception that there's not such a positive view of Israel. And, obviously we're talking generalities. I'm sure, and I know that there are many, such as yourself, who are supportive, but I think that there's a perception that there's perhaps a large portion of the Black American community being pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel. What do you think contributed to that shift?
So I think it's there's some things that were, I think, accidental, and some things that were very, very intentional. I think I'll start with the intentional things. Is one of the reasons why Bayard Rustin was so, and he was a huge civil rights activist in his own right. He was so adamant in calling out Yasser Arafat and the PLO, was not just because of the atrocities he was committing, but because of the attempts, the efforts that he made in reaching out to Black civil rights leaders. Right, there's a very infamous picture of him with Jesse Jackson, where, and it's funny because in the picture it looks like they're embracing each other, and then there's some more controversy behind it because Jesse Jackson at the time really wanted to he really wanted to bring some sort of peace in the Middle East, and there are some civil rights leaders who felt that they could, what the things that they've attained in the US, that they could like basically help other countries with, and so in that particular picture, Jesse Jackson wasn't necessarily embracing Yasser Arafat ideologically, but Yasser wanted that photo shoot. He wanted that image. So it's an image of him with his arm around. It just looks so bad. And but this was his attempt, right? You have Time magazine that featured him as a really cool person. He had like, Ray-Ban sunglasses on and big freedom fighter kind of depiction, and it largely was successful in a lot of different areas. It was successful in hip hop, which is one of the driving forces of our culture. And there's a rapper who he's a member of one of the biggest rap groups in the world, the Wu-Tang Clan, and the rapper, I think it was Method Man. He talked about a song he wrote called PLO Style, and they asked him, why did you? They were interviewing him about the song, and he said, "Hey, we grew up in Bed-Stuy, New York, and there was a PLO store where we could go in there and see pictures and buy things, and we just saw those people as fighting for their freedoms, and we're fighting for our freedoms too." So there is this depiction of and it was intentional by Yasser Arafat to link these two groups together, because he understood, along with the other propaganda, along with the KGB and whoever else is driving this, they understood that color was a big thing in the United States. So they were going to play on that and say, okay, well, the Arabs then, first of all, the whole term Palestinian kind of was born around the 60s, but the Arabs are these brown people. Israel's full of these white people, and they're oppressing just like you guys in the United States. So we're linked. We're the same. The reason why Dr. King said all those things about Israel at the assembly was because it was already happening then. He was responding to this sentiment that was small at the time, but there was, by the time he was assassinated, his disapproval rating was like 70%. Like, a lot of Black people were fed up with him. They thought he was moving too slow, and they were getting tired of this whole nonviolent thing. So there was tension because of that, and then there was tension because of the Israel thing, and this was right after the 6-Day War, and that was when the propaganda really ramped up about this whole color thing. And so you had the militants who had adopted other ideologies, but their ideology linked up with this whole Israel's white and oppressing the brown Arabs. And so Dr. King, when he spoke, before he said his thing about Israel, right before that, he talked about this whole thing about being color consumed. And he said there are those who are color consumed who see this kind of moral mystique in being colored. And he's like, that's not right. We don't follow that course, is what he was saying. So he saw that this ideology was also lending itself to Israel hatred and to Jew hatred. And Yasser Arafat saw that too, which is why he kept playing on that, and he kept pushing that. And it's kind of why where we are now. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Moving to then what else you do. I know that Jews and Christians are struggling with reaching the younger generation. And I don't know if per se Ipsy tries to teach Zionism or Christian Zionism to your audience, but what are some innovative ways you've tried to use in order to reach the younger generation in that regard?
So with Ipsy specifically, our our target audience and our methods have been geared toward young leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, um, people who are maybe they haven't been predisposed to Jew hatred. They haven't been poisoned, and really equipping them and strengthening them. People who are very influential in their space, the education space, or um, and things like that. And we take them on this kind of like a year-long journey where we have these sessions with them, and then we take them to an African country, and then we take them to Israel. So this past year was South Africa in December, and then Israel this past June. Um, and since then, now we call them our Ipsy ambassadors. They've been taking on their own initiatives that we've been helping support them in, but they've been with their own platforms and with what they've been gifted with, have been finding ways to incorporate what they've learned into their spaces and their communities. And so in that way, they have been affecting directly young people in their communities, students in their community, fellow teachers, fellow rabbis, or whatever it is that their space is. And for us, we found that even though we knew this in the beginning, that this would take longer. It's the long route. It's the more effective route because it's more authentic. They came to their own connection. They have their own experiences now, and they're directly sharing that with their people, as opposed to us kind of parachuting in cold and doing this thing. You'll be like, okay, who are you guys? Where are you from? What are you doing? And it's easy in our own communities, but it's harder when we go to others. And so that's been really great for us, and also kind of like a gateway for us to step in alongside them and then further educate where they are in their community. So that's been our tactic, and it's been this year has been really great. And this coming year, 2024, we already have a lot of things lined up to do that even further through our ambassadors, who've been really doing this stuff kind of like on their own. We're just kind of coming alongside them and giving them some materials they need, and helping them, and doing the best we can. So it's been great.
So in your education, since we are Christian Friends of Israeli Communities and we're focused specifically on Judea and Samaria, which is the biblical heartland, where do you gauge to be the awareness among the Black American community about the biblical significance of Judea and Samaria?
In general, there, from my experience, there isn't, specifically with Judea and Samaria, there isn't a lot of awareness. I think that even in terms of nomenclature, like, everyone says West Bank, right? And they don't even realize that the original name for the West Bank was Judea. Something like this was where you get the word Jew from, right? And so I think that there is this there's a gap that's there in terms of modern history, and or just in terms of connecting what's in the Bible to what into now, and for those who go to Israel, they'll make the connection, but for a lot of them, it's like, it's kind of almost fairy tale in their subconscious. These places, like, no, these are real places. They still are real places, actually. We could take you to some of them.
Do we actually go take tours and visit Judea and Samaria? You spent one of your tours?
With our Ipsy ambassadors, we've only done, this is our first full year doing this, and we didn't go to Judea Samaria this time, but so it's going to be in our itinerary next time, because there's actually, a couple of things. One, we were only just getting to know you guys, I think, and so we'd like to do something with you all. But then two, there's a community that has a farm there that my wife went to last time, and so we're going to incorporate that, because it's such a, that is the heartland, and I know that's what you guys, but that is. And our itinerary was also just super packed, so there were a lot of things we wanted to do in relation to Israel and Africa, and so we wanted to make sure that we met certain people who directly did work in the different African countries, and so, but it is, I always say that it's very important to, as best as we can, not to acquiesce to the language of the people our opponents on the other side, right? They keep framing the narrative and often will kind of like secede to some of them, right? We'll see to some of the language. We'll start to say West Bank. We'll start to say, we'll even start to say stuff like we were talking about before, like Palestine, and with that, and with the same context that they're saying it in. It's like, okay, but in order for us to really move forward in this and push forward, we have to hold true to the truth, and that includes staying true to the language. So yeah, so I mean, but very important. I mean, I was on a personal level, I told my wife the next time we go, I would love to do a little bit of music in Judea, Samaria, because I know that a couple of the places, I know at least one of the places that I know of, they host people sometimes, and I was like, I would love to just come and sing and play and all that stuff. So yeah, no, that'll definitely happen.
That's beautiful. Well, I would love to invite you over to my house for a Shabbat meal. So you are more than welcome to come to Samaria.
Thank you.
Awesome meeting you. Thank you so much for your
Yes, you
time,
too.
and
Thank you, Maya.
and really all the best.